I put up on the Relationships at Work Instagram account a little while ago that said, if your organization is customer first, and a lot of organizations say they are, which you would think would be a good thing, right? We're here to serve our customers. But if your customers are first, where do your employees fit in that? Because by being customer first, automatically your employees aren't. My guest today, I love this. In her new book, she says customers do come first, but employees should come more first. And when I read that, I'm like, oh, I need her on this podcast. I need her in my airwaves and in my brain. So I am a big fan of our guest today, and I'll take any opportunity to pick her brain. And we're going to talk about that people first culture. Hold on. It's that podcast you get all excited about. Yeah. Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture podcast. My name is Russel Lolliker. I'm said host, and happy to have you along for the ride once again. I also want to just say, thank you. Thank you for your support. We're chugging along on this podcast. I'm loving it. I'm loving the opportunities of the big brains I get to talk to. I'm loving the questions and the feedback you're providing. It's all the warm and fuzzy. It's so great. I took forever to start this damn thing. And now I'm like, why? Why did I wait so long? It has just been such a gift to talk to you, to talk to these brilliant guests and the guests to come. So, if you think you're getting a lot of value out of this podcast and you think it's pretty great, I encourage you to please share it with others, whether it's in an email or just a recommendation to somebody that's looking for a new podcast they want to listen to. Please, pretty please. I'd love it if you'd, I'm not desperate or anything. I'm just saying, if you like it, spread the word. My guest today is, she's a rock star. I've been in the sphere, the orbit of our next guest for years and years and years. When I was a lot more focused on the customer experience side of relationships at work, I was very honored to be thrown on quite a few top lists. Top this, top that, thought leader stuff. And Annette, seasoned pro. She's like on every list I've ever heard of before I was ever on one and well after I've ever going to be on one. The woman knows her stuff. So you get associated with brilliant people and you get the absolute pleasure of connecting with them and talking to them over time. And years go by and you can't believe years go by. And then you find yourself starting a podcast. And then this person writes a book that is all about, building the right kind of culture. Worlds colliding, people. So I could not be more thrilled to have Annette Franz on the podcast. I will mention she was really under the weather. I am so honored that she took the time, that she powered through. I edited out all the coughing and was able to be here for us and to share her thoughts and insights on creating a culture, an organization that focuses on people, that focuses on those that actually build those relationships with customers, that actually drive those sales and that profit and that brand. You know what I'm talking about? The employees. So let's dive first into all things Annette. And on the show, it's Annette Franz, and here's why she is awesome. She's the founder and CEO of CX Journey Inc. She's on Forbes Coaches Council, and she's a longstanding member and board member of CXPA, Customer Experience Professional Association. Oh, I'm not done. I'm just breathing in all this air because I have to get it out with all the stuff that she's been doing. She's an author. The first book, amazing, by the way, if you haven't checked it out yet, Customer Understanding, 3 Ways to Put the Customer and Customer Experience into the Heart of Your Business. The woman loves a subheading. Here we go. We got another one. And her latest one, which I'm having my hot little hand right now, is called Built to Win, Designing and Customer-Centric Culture That Drives Value for Your Business. lots of honors, lots of awards. And if you do a little Google search, which I love very much, she also took animal science at Ohio State University. I love LinkedIn for that very reason, to find out that stuff. Hi, Annette.
Hello, Russell. How are you? Thank you for that. Yes, that's quite the story of where it all began, right?
I'm scrolling down LinkedIn. I'm like, animal science. Oh, I am mentioning that.
Well, I grew up on a farm, so that was my dream as a girl was I'm going to be a veterinarian, and that quickly came to an end when I found out I needed 6 quarters of chemistry to get into vet school. So chemistry is my kryptonite. So nope, it wasn't going to happen.
And thanks for removing it from my career path too. Yeah, I had no idea about the science part of it, which makes a hell of a lot of sense. So on the show today, we're talking culture, because in this book, Built to Win, which is this is interesting, very customer centric. Now, the podcast, of course, is all about employee engagement and employee experience. And you go through this book, and spoilers, one of the biggest part of this book is about culture, even though it says customer centric, and people are going to think, well, customer experience, how you deal with the customer, but you're getting into the foundation, like how is your organization actually built and actually to deliver? The first question I have that I love defining is things like this. What is culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great place to start, right? Culture, the way that I define it is core values plus behaviors, right? Core values and behaviors. So you define your core values, and then you have to also identify acceptable and unacceptable behaviors for each of those core values. And it's really then becomes, the way that we do things around here. That's how people often describe it, right? But that's how it becomes how we do things around here, is because you've got the core values, you live those core values based on behaviors that are both, acceptable and unacceptable. So you know what you need to do.
So we hear about this all the time, where our company values. Did I mention our company values? Hey, look at the poster on my wall. Company values, company values. The whole bullshit territory of what is values. We know organizations are not necessarily getting this, even though your explanation and definition are pretty straightforward. Yeah. So what don't organizations understand about culture?
You just made a great point. It can't just be, the poster on the wall, right? It has to be, they have to be socialized and they have to be operationalized. And there's a lot of different ways to socialize them, get them out there and get everybody understanding what they are. But the key really is to operationalize them. And that really means that we need to use those core values when we hire, when we fire, when we promote, when we make decisions, when we create policies, when we create processes. Everything we do has to be done through the lens of those core values. Otherwise, it's pointless, and you don't get the culture that you deliberately are trying to design.
So your company knows their values, whether they act on them or not.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're certainly aware of them. How does that intersect in the realm of culture when it comes to people's personal values? Because they're bringing stuff from home that maybe family is important, but a lot of corporations aren't going, well, family is our number one value. How do those align to benefit culture?
Well, I think there's a couple of different thoughts on this. So first one is we talk about culture fit, and a lot of times that makes, people's eyes roll and, whatever. But I really do believe that culture fit is sort of a two-sided thing, right? It's the employer looking at the employee or potential employee and saying, is this person a fit? Or do they embody what we live every day? And then for the employee has to say, okay, what are your core values? I mean, they need to ask that, what are your core values? And employees like to work for companies most of the time where their values align with the company values, right? And here's the crazy thing is, like, if you look at core values on a company's website, sometimes they're kind of mushy and squishy and not so far off from what a normal person's values would be, right? So now they have to step back and take a look at some other things. What's the brand purpose, the brand promise, some of the other corporate statements too, just to make sure that they align with the organization. So culture fit is one of those things, right? I mean, it really is on both the employer and the employee to make sure that we work for a place, or we hire folks who align with the values of our organization. And to your point about the book being about a customer-centric culture, when we have a customer-centric culture, at least one of those values is going to be something around people, people first. Customers are, we obsessive customers, or, whatever those values are. So we want to make sure that we hire people who care about people and who aren't like, I don't want to be on the phone. I don't want to work. They're just not. We always say hire for attitude, train for skill. And it really is true that you want somebody that is obviously going to care about their colleagues, but they're also going to care about the people outside of the organization that they interact with.
I want to dig a little deeper into that you say customer-centric culture in the book.
Yep.
But you also say employees more first. Yep. And we've also heard people first. And I remember our conversation on LinkedIn where I said customer first, and you're like, no, that's not this. So what are we talking about here? I just want to get a little more definition of terms.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great question. So a couple of different things that I'll try to point out there. So we can't have a customer-centric culture without taking care of our people. And our people are, all people, right? It's employees, it's customers, it's vendors, it's partners, it's everything. It really, I could have called the book, or I could have called the concept people-centric, because it really is about putting people first. 3 of the principles that I talk about in the book are people before products, profits, and metrics. So it really is about putting your people first. And the reason that I often just use that term people is because we know that the employee experience drives the customer experience, right? That's why we say if customers are first, then employees have to be more first. We have to make sure that employees are taken care of, that they have the tools, the resources, the training, everything that they need to do the job that they need to do. And one of the things, you probably read it in the book, I share this story a lot. When I first start working with clients, I'll interview executives, employees, and customers at a company. And the most profound thing that I hear from employees is, first of all, obviously everybody comes to work wanting to do a great job, and they want to, nobody comes to work and says, hey, I'm going to have a crappy day today. Nobody does that, right? I'm coming to work today, and I'm just going to, piss off all our customers kind of thing. Right. But the most profound thing that I hear from them is, I don't have the tools. I don't have the resources. The policies are broken, or outdated. The processes are broken or outdated. I don't have the tools, the resources, et cetera, to serve my customers the way that they deserve to be served. The first time I heard that from employees, I thought, wow, first of all, that right there is sort of the epitome of the employee experience drives customer experience connection. But they get it. Employees get it, right? And so we really do need to put our employees first and take care of our employees.
Who owns culture in an organization?
Great question. I mean, it's not... a couple of things. First of all, I think it's the CEO. It's not your HR department. If you have a head of people and culture, or talent and culture, or whatever, I think that's that individual or that group does. But first and foremost, I think it's a CEO. I think that the CEO sets the tone. The CEO and the executive team have to walk the walk and talk the talk. They're not excluded from living these core values and building the culture that they, these cultures have to be, if they're not deliberately designed, you get the culture you design, or you get the culture you allow, right? And so that's why it has to start from the top. I also believe that there's this bottom up approach too, right? Once the CEO and the executive team set the tone, there's got to be this grassroots groundswell. The employees have to adopt it and live it, and so then they own it, right? So it is a combination. It's top down and bottom up, but I firmly believe it starts at the top.
As an organization, you've designed what you believe will be the most amazing, bestest ever people-centric culture. How do you check in on that? It's not like something that you're just going to design and forget about and go, okay, employees, now it's on you not to fuck this up. Yeah. Like it's how do employees or how do executives make sure that what they've designed continues to be successful, impactful, purposeful?
Well, and it's a great question. I mean, there are ways to measure culture. So that's one thing. It's funny because people do think that it's just fluff oftentimes, and there's no way to measure it. There are ways to measure your culture. You've got your governance structure and, the committee set up. The culture committee is one of those committees in that governance structure. They can take it upon themselves to sort of take a pulse of what's going on within each of, because it's a cross-functional committee, right? So they can take a pulse on an ongoing basis of what's going on in their departments or in their part of the organization. Taking a pulse is a great way to do it. I'm working with a client here in Orange County that, they actually use a survey platform that allows them to just, throw out questions every, on their Slack channel every couple of weeks, just to kind of check in on people. And the best way to do it is just to talk to people and pay attention to what's going on in the organization. But there are formal measurement, probably one of the bigger metrics or one of the bigger ways to know if it's going the way you want it to go is just looking at sort of some of the business outcomes, right? What's your employee retention like? What are employees saying when they leave the organization? What's happening with your customers, and what are customers saying? There's a lot of different ways that you can get feedback about what's happening with your culture today. The problem is, though, with some of that is that you have to be open to hearing it, and you have to be open to paying attention to it, and you have to be able to tie it back to the culture and not just try to say, oh, well, that was just, start making excuses for why things happen. You actually have to be able to be open to tying it back to the culture. And I think that's key. You can measure all you want, but you have to be open to knowing that the culture is the foundation. And if that's screwed up, then other things will get screwed up down the line.
So say you're not quite sure what kind of a culture you have in your organization. If I'm an executive and I love my metrics and I love to point to things, like what would I be looking at going, yes, I've achieved good people first culture?
It is going to be around retention. It's going to be around your employee engagement scores. There are tools out there that you can use, like I said, to measure your culture, and you can use those metrics to track it as well. But I honestly think the biggest thing is going to be retention. And then, if you have a way of tracking, obviously productivity, I think that's one thing. When you start to see a culture going toxic, things start falling apart, and you will see that very quickly. And I don't know that that's necessarily in any number except for retention and engagement, right? I mean, it's funny because when you define employee experience, people often confuse employee experience with culture, and they're not the same thing. But the culture really is sort of the foundation of, being able to design and deliver a great employee experience going forward. So the very first place you're going to see it is in your employees, and then it's going to trickle down the line, right? And then you're going to see it in your customer retention and customer satisfaction, because it all is linked together.
I hope leaders are looking sooner than later when, say, their culture is going downhill and they're waiting for people to leave before they start paying attention.
Right.
I would hope that they're looking for more smaller gestures, i.e. people aren't providing feedback as readily, right, or being as honest with their feedback as readily. What are some red flags that you think that leaders should be really looking for?
I think that's a great point. Collaboration stops happening, right? People just sort of stick to themselves and don't want to be a part of. I'll use a prime example of a client that I worked with a couple of years ago. They don't attend the social events. They don't participate. They aren't as open about. They kind of just shut down. The one client that I'm referencing, the leadership team noticed it first when they said, we have these monthly events that we do, and it's their social events, and it's just something we do, and employees would always go to them. But now all of a sudden, they're making excuses about why they don't go, and they're not showing up, and it's this or it's that. And so you're absolutely right. Suddenly there's gossiping, a lot of gossiping, and the meetings after the meetings, and there are those kinds of things that start happening, and then things just turn sour from there. So yeah, you're right. There are a lot of sort of little signals that happen before the retention and the engagement numbers go down. Absolutely.
How does a good culture fuel employee engagement?
So a good culture, there's this chart or graphic that I have in the book that basically says that, if you have that foundation in place, right? If you've hired people who are a culture fit, and that has so many good things to it versus some people think it's a bad thing. But if you hire for culture fit, if you have the core values in place and everybody understands those, if you've got leadership who's living and breathing, there's so much to that foundation of culture, right? That, and employees have what they need to do their jobs. then and the workplace is sane and there's psychological safety, there's no fear of recourse. Like there's so much that goes into that definition of culture. It gets simplified when we say core values plus behaviors, but there's so much that actually is involved in all of that, right? And so much around that. So when we have that foundation, when we have that solid foundation, and it's a good foundation and it's positive, then employees are aligned with the values, they're aligned with the purpose, they have this sense of belonging, right? And they have this sense of achievement, and they feel valued and they feel appreciated. It's reflected in their energy and enthusiasm, and they want to be productive. And that's how we get to the engagement, right? It's the engagement to me is sort of it's a two-way street, right? It's sort of this confluence of something great has been done by the employer, and that is developing that foundation, that culture, that safe space, that great workplace. And then the contributions from the employee as well. I've made this emotional commitment to doing a great job, and I feel this sense of belonging and all of that. So when those two come together, that's when we start to see those higher engagement numbers. Absolutely.
I want to build to win my organization. I want to those steps that will either reinforce the great work I'm already doing in an organization or right the ship, as it were. So what advice would you give? Because the book's really good at laying out considerations and things you should do, but where should you start to change the culture of your organization?
Yeah, it really is. And it's the things that we've talked about already, leadership and culture, right? And it's got to start with leadership, right? Leadership has to be, first of all, they need to know what kind of culture they want to design, right? I mean, that's critical. And for me, if we're talking about especially a customer-centric culture, but whatever your culture is, I feel like it has to be it is deliberately designed to be the way it is, right? And in order to do that, first of all, there has to be a commitment from the leadership team, from the executive team, from all the leaders in the organization, and they have to be aligned on it, right? They all have to be in agreement that this is what we're going to do, this is who we're going to be, this is how we're going to do things around here. The thing about a culture is it's there's a couple of things, right? So you have a culture that you want in the entire organization, but you will have these different subcultures popping up within the organization from the different teams and departments and stuff. But you want your main culture to be the one that you deliberately designed to be that way. And so you have to that's where it's got to start. It's got to start with that leadership commitment and alignment, because it is, I'll just talk about customer-centric culture for a minute. It's customers being customer-centric, and customer centricity runs through the entire organization. We don't have just an individual who's customer centric or a department that's customer centric, or we're sending out customer centric messaging. A customer centric culture is a culture. I mean, customer centricity runs through the veins of the organization. It's the way that I define it is, there's no discussions, no decisions, no designs without bringing in that customer voice, without asking, how is this going to impact her? How is it going to make her feel? What value does it deliver for the customer? If we don't have the entire organization on board, if every leader in every department, in every division isn't on board with that, it trickles down to making it challenging for employees. And then ultimately, customers have an experience that's not seamless. It's an inconsistent experience across the brand. So sorry, I'm dying over here. I'm just coughing. Don't mind me.
All good. That's what good editing is for. It's all good.
Yes. And I've run out of tea too, so perfect. All right.
You sort of touched on it a bit, and I'm immediately flaring when I hear intentional and design, because the flip side of that is trying to change things and realizing it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take some time. There is going to be some effort involved. So what are some further mistakes you've seen leadership make when they're going through the motions of, we're going to change culture? Because I hear that phrase a lot, but I'm like, it's going to be a while, right? This is not something we're going to do in a weekend.
Well, and that's probably the biggest mistake, is they think it's going to happen in a weekend. How and it really is. It can take 3 to 5 years sometimes, but that is probably the biggest mistake, the thought that this can happen overnight. I think because there are really sort of 4 things that go into really making that change or ensuring that change is going to happen. So first of all, you've got to involve your employees. You've got to communicate. You've got to model the behaviors, and then you've got to reinforce. If you fail on any one of those things, you're going to have a setback, right? Or you're just going to fail in general, right? So you've got to make sure you involve and bring employees along from the beginning, right? Involve them in the process. Don't force change on them. You've got to communicate. Why are we changing the culture? What does it mean? What's in it for me? What happens if we don't change? What's in it for the business? Those kinds of things. Leaders have to model the behavior, and I use some examples in the book where leaders, their core values say one thing, and then the leaders say another thing. And those companies are, no longer in business. The examples I used went back to 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. But you know what? If you're going through a crisis, your core values are the things that are going to hold the business together. So if you don't model those behaviors and reinforce is the fourth component. If you don't reinforce the behaviors and the culture that you want, then it's not going to happen, and I also say in the book, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? So if you want your employees to act a certain way, leaders have to act that way too, and they've got to model it and they've got to reinforce it. So I think that's where the biggest failures happen, is if any one of those, A, it's not going to happen overnight, and B, if any one of those four things aren't done consistently, you're going to have a setback or you're going to fail.
In the book, you actually mentioned that culture fit could be a whole other book, but I just want to touch on it one more time because you've mentioned it earlier. Vision and mission, amazingly useful tools if used correctly. How would you recommend that be used even at the onboarding, even in the interview process, around how vision and mission could help with that culture fit?
I think we have to look at all of our corporate statements when we're hiring, right? I think it's important to look at, obviously, values. That's sort of the key of the culture fit. But we want somebody who's going to be on board with where we're going, right? I actually work with a company right now where they just hired an executive who is on board where the company is today, but he's not on board with where the company is going. And that's your vision. That's your vision, right? And so it's a challenge, because when I completed the executive interviews and had a conversation with the CEO, we talked about this one particular individual, and he realizes it. And it was, even when I interviewed that executive, it was such a different conversation from all the other, executives that I interviewed at that company. And yeah, it's a challenge, and I don't see that executive is going to be there for the long run, and so that's why we have to take that into consideration. We need to hire people who not only will be with us today and can get on the bus with us today, but can then, when we get there, are just as excited about where we're going and how we're going to get there and help us get there, and that's, I think, a big part of that.
I want to touch on a topic that you brought up actually in your first book and bring it up again in this one, which is the outside in, inside out decision making.
Yes.
Because I love that. I love that I know you're referring to it more from the customer side of things, but I'm curious, can it also be used? Well, first, let's quickly just define it. And also, how can it be used internally?
So outside in is I'll start with inside out. Inside out is when we think that when we make decisions. So I said, culture is, or customer-centric culture is one where no discussions, no decisions, no designs, right? Without bringing in the customer voice. That's outside in. When we bring in the customer voice and we into all of those things, into everything we do, into our decisions, and we always make sure that we take the customer, always have the customer's best interest at heart in our decisions. That's outside in. When we sit here and we say, I think I know, or I think the customer wants this, or we think we know what's best for the customer, and we make those decisions and we design an experience and we do those things, and we think we know, that's inside out, right? That's not even taken into consideration what a customer is saying or needs or any of that, right? Whether that would apply to the employees and the employee experience, I think so, because a lot of the concepts that apply, and it might not be, we may not refer to it as inside out and outside in, but a lot of the concepts that we use when we design the customer experience, it's the exact same work that we need to do when we design the employee experience. So we can't sit and say, we think we know what our employees want. We think this is the best experience for our employees. We need to actually talk to our employees. We need to listen to them and bring that voice of the employee into the experience that we design for them. So yeah, absolutely. We may not refer to it as outside in and inside out, but it's the same concept applies. Absolutely.
It might help for people that are an executive that have that us versus them approach sometimes when it's like, well, we're on a different floor. We're different than all of you people. So maybe it's good to look at that from the outside in when you might be thinking your executive C-suite is kind of a bubble.
Yeah, that's a great way. That's a great way of putting it. Here you are up in the penthouse. So get outside of the penthouse and listen to your employees. Absolutely. Great analogy.
People before products, people before profit, people before metrics. This is 25% of your book is talking about how people should be before those. And I know some people who are probably just going, what? I'm sorry, what? What now? Who, what, where, when, how? So how do you convince somebody in a position to influence culture, a leader, an executive, to go, oh, no, people, these are still important, products, profit, metrics, but people, how do you convince them to think differently?
Yeah, well, here's the one that I like to just put out there. And the last chapter of the book is again, open letter to CEOs. And the closing line is, take a minute, close your eyes, and think about your business without customers. And same with employees. Think about your business without employees. And unfortunately, right now with the Great Resignation, a lot of companies, our leaders are having to think about, their business without employees or with far too few employees. So I think that's the way to look at it, right? Is to think, where would my business be if I didn't take care of my people, my employees? Where would my business be if we didn't take care of our customers and treat them the way that they want to be treated and help them solve the problems they're trying to solve? So the interesting thing is that let's take each one of those individually. People before products. Okay, if you are designing products without thinking about who you're designing them for, then who are you designing them for? I have talked to so many startups where my first question to them is, what problem are you solving for your customers? And they're like, I don't know. We didn't talk to customers. And it's like, okay, well, that's not going to go very far. What? So who are you in business for? If you're not designing a product for your customers, if you're not talking to the people who are going to buy this product first, it's like Seth Godin says, you'll end up finding customers for your products, not products for your customers. There's a very clear distinction there. And then we talk about people before profits, it's not that profits aren't important. We obviously we know they are, but the realization there is that connection, that the focusing on the profits are outcomes, right? But focusing on the people and taking care of your people, that's a means to that outcome. So if we take care of our people, whether it's employees or customers, if we take care of them, the profits will come. So that's the thought process there. And then the last one, people before metrics. I started my career 30 years ago at J.D. Power and Associates, and it's probably the work that we did there really created some bad behavior at car dealerships over the years, and with NPS, we've seen bad behavior with companies who are trying to move the needle, move the metric, right? Hey, I want to be at the top of the JD Power ranking. Hey, I want to, I want my NPS to be 10 points higher this quarter than it was last quarter. And what we end up doing is we do things differently, and we do different things when we focus on moving the needle versus when we focus on improving the experience to move the needle, right? If you think about that first thing that I said about the car dealers, and I just, bought a car recently and still had the same experience, even 30 years later after I was at JD Power and Associates, where you go in and you buy the car and then, they say, hey, you're going to get a survey, and rate me a 10 out of 10. And if you don't, I always exaggerate, but if you don't, I'm going to get fired. I'm not getting my commission. I got to give up my firstborn. I get, all of these different things. And it's like, wait a second. That's a shitty experience for the customer. It's icky. It feels icky, but it's really bad for the employee too. Really, you're having the employee beg for a score, have the employee beg for their commission or their promotion by asking the customer to rate them a 10 out of 10. I mean, I use those kinds of examples and those kinds of stories to say, you got to just step back for a minute and really think about why you're in business and what you're doing here. And why wouldn't you put people first?
Annette, we've come to the part where I ask you the final two questions. Thank you for suffering through. I know you're not feeling well, so I appreciate this.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
The final two. First question, what's your best or worst, you get to pick one or the other, employee experience that you've ever had? So
I'm going to use I'm just going to have to hope that they're not listening to this, but I'm going to use my last employer. I was the only woman in the company. It's a startup, and there, I'll just sort of summarize a couple of things. Communication was awful. Communication was, and I was on the leadership team, right? Communication was awful. I was often excluded from meetings that I should have been involved in. I was the head of marketing and customer experience. So it would have behooved them to have me in a lot of those strategy meetings, but I was left out for whatever reason. There was sort of this lack of trust. There was, it ended up just being really a toxic culture, but a lot of it came, from the top, from the very top, the co-founders. And it was probably the thing that, or I wouldn't say probably, it is the sort of final straw on the camel's back that said, you know what, I'm going to leave the corporate world and go out and start my own business. That's how bad it was. And I've had similar experiences over the years, but that one was sort of just like, this is the one that just kicked me in the booty and said, it's time to go. You don't ever want to deal with this kind of experience ever again. So.
Was there a light bulb moment where you're like, okay, here's the straw. It's been horrible forever. Here's what happened to make me go, I'm out. Peace.
Yeah, but I actually can't even share. It was a situation that happened with an employee that had to be disciplined, and the way that it was handled by the co-founders and the way that they brought me into it and didn't have my back was it was an ugly situation. And that was the moment where I said, yeah, it's time to go. Definitely time to go.
My sub question I like to ask about that is, how long ago was that?
That was 5 years ago. 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just, I like to reinforce the fact that bad and good employee experiences last. I've talked to people where it's like, oh, that happened 3 decades ago, and it still bothers them. So It's just people don't understand the impacts of what bad leadership, bad employee experiences, bad cultures can have on people personally.
No, it's a great point. And you know what? Even 30 years later, people are still talking about it, right? And how does that impact the brand, right? And what, they're out there talking about it, that's...
Absolutely. So let's leave it on a good note, Annette, with a question is, what is one simple action, singular, that people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
One word, talk. Talk to each other, get to know your coworkers. For leaders, get to know your employees, get to know them on a personal level, on a human level, right? Just talk to each other and listen to each other and spend a little bit more time caring about the person, the human behind the, hey, you're the head of HR. Hey, you're the programmer. Hey, you're the, forget about the role and really focus on the person. And that goes both ways. Employees can do the same things for their managers and their VPs or whatever. I just take the time to be humans and get to know each other.
It's amazing the amount of empathy and compassion that can be built when you understand what other people do, are, challenges they overcome, if they become people instead of positions. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Exactly.
Well, that was Annette. She just wrote a book called Built to Win, Designing a Customer-Centric Culture That Drives Value for Your Business. Couldn't recommend picking it up more. Thank you, Annette, so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And that will do it for another episode of Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture Podcast. Oh, the dramatic pauses continue. If you haven't had a chance yet, I do encourage you to check out relationshipsatwork.ca. That is the blog, the show notes, where I share my thoughts, my experiences. And there's also, at the top right, you'll see this thing called Raw Notes. It is R@W Notes. That's right. It's the Relationship at Work newsletter or weekly note. I don't call it a newsletter because truthfully, it's not long. It's brief. It sticks to some musings that might make you think a little differently. I haven't launched it yet, though by the time you listen to this, it might be well underway. But I'm looking to launch it very soon, the next couple of weeks, actually. And I'd love you along for the ride. I'd love to have that connection with you. So if you think you'd like something in your inbox that focuses on the employee experience, workplace culture, leadership, I hope this strikes your fancy. Well, you take care of yourself, and I look forward to talking with you again. Bye.